Introduce myself. I'm John Hoeksma. I'm the editor and co-founder of EHealth Insider. And as I said, welcome to this joint event on imaging, what next? PACS was, and imaging management was one of the great success stories of the past 10 years in NHS IT, where a lot of progress was made. But the world always kind of keeps turning. And with the national program contracts now due for renewal, then really sort of now is the time that people are looking to how they build on those foundations and those successes. And obviously the technology has moved on, the art of what's possible has moved on. We hope to give you some glimpses of that today. And Agfa here with partners including Barco and HP. There's going to be demo sessions outside. We encourage you to ask your questions, take a look at what's possible. To answer the question that we posed about imaging what next, many of the kind of elements of what next are already clear. There's going to be a lot more push into other imaging specialities, be it cardiology, be it dermatology, much more integration of images into shared image stores at a national, regional, local kind of level, making the workflow and management of those images much more intuitive, easier, cost-effective. Mobility, a huge, huge kind of factor. People have been hearing about it for a long time. It's becoming a reality, and becoming a reality at scale for many people. And then often kind of gets tacked on at the end, but is by no means tokenistic, is the patient. Putting the patient in a position where they can access their images, they can share them with clinicians of their choice. Agfa provide the technology that underpins the Belgian patient platform, enabling citizens in Belgium to actually view their own records, including images, and share them with clinicians of their choice. These are very familiar themes to us all in the NHS about putting patients in control of their information. So we've got some great speakers. We've going to begin with Carl Grundy, who's the head of EHI Intelligence. Carl's going to set the scene and describe how imaging forms part of kind of wider technology trends in the NHS, some of the sort of changes within the PACS market. I warn you, Carl tends to pack a lot of information into a short period of time, so do stay up. Then we're going to be followed by Chris Townend, who's the Global Product Manager for Impacts for Agfa, and we'll follow with a Q&A session after that, and then the first of the breaks. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Carl Grundy. Thank you very much.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. So the UK forecast. So it's looking fairly changeable. The weather's moving in slightly. There's going to be a few showers. But apart from the fact that I'm British, and it would be remiss of me not to talk about the weather, I think it does give a good picture of the UK health market. It is massively changeable. There's a lot of high pressure going on, and things do need to change. Just a couple of questions. Is there anyone who feels that there's a particular issue in the NHS market which is either causing a problem with their department or the market as a whole? I know it's early. Any particular pressures, any high pressures from anybody? Okay, I'll suggest a few then. So, market drivers. Now, this is the demographics. So the demographics in the UK health market are becoming an issue. So people are getting older and there's more and more people. So there's a pressure on the market in that sense. We're running out of money. The Nicholson Challenge says that although money has been ring-fenced, actually with the increase on services, there's actually going to be less money to serve. So there's potentially going to be a funding gap. There's been a 20% reduction in costs. A lot of that have been wages, a lot have been staff cuts. There's only so much of that you can do. So therefore some things need to change. Paperless. If anyone's walked into a hospital, into a local care provider or social services, they'll probably see a lot of pictures like this. If you actually do see a picture like this, please do send it in to me. But the paperless environment, there is a target of 2018 to go paperless. Therefore, things like document management are going to be massively important in the market, but also how people adapt to their document management quotas. Are you going to be scanning documents, which we know some organisations are going to be doing, or actually are you changing the way that you work and looking at it in a different environment and starting again as a ground zero scenario? Integration, that's integration within the care provision itself within the organisation. So in an acute setting, this might be integration of services to help proliferate with the electronic records management side of things, or integration across care providers, integration with social providers. There is a single market out there, although we break it down into lots of different care provisions, there is a single market. A patient goes through various touch points, and that patient needs to be looked after on a whole patient care provider. There's more regulation coming. People talk about an Ofsted style scenario in the market with Monitor and CQC. One of the things there are going to be is a lot more questions, therefore people need to have a lot more answers and understanding where they are going with their organisation. There is investment though. Investment's coming in the form of the technology funds, the Nurse Tech Fund out of the Safe Hospitals, Safe Awards programme. There is 500 million for the Tech Fund. There's been another 100 million which has been given out for the Nurse Tech Fund. And it's very different. And also the second round of funding is changing as well. So they're moving away from some of the technology. They're moving away from some of the strict Treasury return on investment environment. And actually now it's about delivering outcomes and patient needs, patient safety and clinical outcomes. So one of the things that the Nurse Tech Fund could be used for is devices. So devices that can show digital imaging for better use of services, but also investment in terms of infrastructure, investment in terms of actually making use of the systems which have already been procured. The final one is mergers. The market is changing. There's a number of CSUs which are no longer in existence. Some of the acutes have disappeared. More and more organisations are working together. There's joint procurement going on, especially in the PACS market. We've seen down in the southwest, 5 organisations have grouped together to renew their services. There's been collaboration up in the northeast with a consortia around their framework. And frameworks are beginning to play more and more a part in the health market, like they are in the rest of the public sector marketplace. So here's a few things to think about. So hopefully when that question's asked again, someone might volunteer. But to just dive into this a little bit more. So what's it looking like? So I've talked about the pressures on the market, but actually the spend on IT is increasing in the market. So starting on the left with kind of 2012-13 going up to 2017, you can see there is a marked increase. My intelligence team would tell you this probably isn't massively accurate, but it gives you a good sense of ideas on it. What does it look like in numbers? So year end in 2013, the spend on IT was just under 1.7 billion. By the end of the financial year in 2017, it's going to be just shy of 2 billion. So there is more investment coming in. And that doesn't include some of the national investment, which is coming in from NHS England. So there is more money out there and more money to attend. One of the things that organisations need to work better on is some of the business cases to provide and help people actually say, these are what we can do with some of this money. Here's the benefits that we're going to realise. The acute software in particular is one of the highest spend increases in the market. That's going to raise up to £315 million. Current trends in the digital imaging market. You can see on this, actually, although there's an increase in 2014 and 15, and a small increase in here, you can see it actually starts to drop a little bit here. So there's an overall increase, but it's dropping a little bit. Now, why does that make any sense? I've just said the IT market is changing. Now, a lot of this is predicting on what's happening at the moment and what's been happening over the last year. So if we look at this in a little bit more detail, what's happened? So the end of the National Programme for IT, 87 trusts renewed their PACS and RIS through NHS supply chain. Now, one of these things is actually moving things through a framework, as I mentioned earlier, so people can actually renew what they've got. Now, the key is in what I've just said there, renew what you've got. A lot of organisations have made the decision to renew what they've got, not make a change, not go for anything different, not change the environment of how they're using the technology. Is that an issue? 69 million has been spent so far. Now, the programme is set to be completed by June 2016, but actually the majority will be finished by 2015. Again, these are renewals through a framework. Now, renewals through a framework have their benefits. Potentially 20–40% savings have been realised by many of these organisations. Now, those, again, are savings. Now, savings are important because it means you can then potentially invest that money in other places. It means you can start doing things in a different way. But also, if it's just about savings, often you don't get the full benefits out of the technology. Innovation and vision is often a loss compared to some of the savings. So savings has to be put alongside ambitions as well. Is it good for innovation? Is it good for benefits? And where's the shift change happening in the market? There's an awful lot of changes which are going on. Cambridge is a big one at the moment. They've gone out for a major business transformation project with the likes of HP and Epic. The Epic side, which is what a lot of people talk about in terms of electronic patient record, is actually the poor cousin of the money which is being spent. Most of the money is going with HP to form business transformation. Why have Cambridge made that decision to go down this route rather than just on a purely technology side? The reason why is cultural change. They looked at their environment, they looked at what they wanted to achieve, they looked at the possibility of greater income coming from an international research fund that's potentially there. Cambridge University is an internationally recognised name, so not everybody is like Cambridge. So again, the market is very different, and the market needs to be treated in a very different way. Everyone is unique, everyone is slightly different, even if we have similar pressures which are going on in our market. Innovation is often something that people struggle with. What does innovation really mean? Is me going out and buying a new product, a brand new fancy laptop, is that innovation? Well, the product might be innovative, but if I do exactly the same thing that I've always done with that fancy new laptop, I'm not producing any innovation whatsoever. What benefits am I adding to my organisation by working in exactly the same way? There's been no shift change at all. I've just got a different laptop. Actually, if I start using it in a different way because I've decided part of the reason why I bought that new technology is because I wanted to work in a different way, and I'm starting to harness the benefits around innovation and challenging things. It's challenging yourself, it's challenging your department, but it's also challenging people across the organisation. It's very easy in a PACS environment to say, right, this is my department, or if I'm a surgeon, this is my department, I'm interested in brain surgeons, so for the technology fund, I'm going to go out and get technology to help me do better surgery. Actually, as the Cambridge example I listed a moment ago, there is an opportunity for everybody to work together. That's the community, the suppliers, everybody together to say, we're going to do something different, and this is why we're going to do something different, because we can make a difference in our organisation, which makes a difference on clinical outcomes, which makes benefits to the patients. I'm going to give you a little example on some of this about how it's being potentially done differently. So this Birmingham Children's Hospital, I don't know if people know Birmingham, but it's a specialist hospital, so it's a little bit smaller than some of the other foundation trusts. So they've started to expand digital imaging out of radiology. There's not a lot of organisations that have done that. There's been an awful lot of work about archiving and moving information over. But this is a particular example where they've looked at it and said this can be proliferated out through an EMR process. They are now recording operations and using this on videos. Now, one of these things that you can do on this, it's one, helpful to see what's going on as an organisation. This is where you start to actually bring in patients into the organisation. And ultimately, the reason why we're here is to make better clinical decisions and better outcomes for patients. Now, if you can train some of your staff by watching videos how to interact with patients, if you can show some of this imaging to patients in order for them to understand and learn what's going on, often it stops clinicians talking in a clinical way, which most patients, to be honest, don't have a clue about. I've worked in the health market for a while now. There's an awful lot of jargon in there that I have no clue about. And I'm probably someone who is more aware, so people who aren't aware, they need different things. And you can use this on devices. So one of the things that they've started to do there as well is use tablets. So if you've got a patient, one of the things you can do is actually take that tablet to the bedside within the ward, as long as you've got Wi-Fi, which we know some of the Victorian buildings don't have, and you can actually show those images to the patient so they can understand what's happening rather than talking in jargon. So it's not just about what's happening in your role, it's about the role that you're trying to provide to the patients and what technology can be harnessed in order to deliver some of those benefits. Use of digital devices on the ward, as I mentioned, it is limited by access and it is limited by Wi-Fi. It's also the fact that, as the one mentioned above, it's the harnessing of cloud services. The health market has been a little bit slow in the adoption of cloud services, whether it's software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. G-Cloud platform is now one of the biggest frameworks in the UK market. There is one organisation in the health market who has used the G-Cloud framework, over £100 million at the moment. That's it. It really isn't using these frameworks that are out there. Yes, there are dedicated health frameworks. There's also public sector frameworks which organisations can use. Organisations like Agfa, EMC, HP are on these services, and if they're not there, they're partnering with organisations which are providing services on there. It makes procurement a lot easier for organisations. A lot of the risk assessments have been done. You get an understanding of what you're potentially going to buy and pay for. And there is also other organisations which have used it. So again, that collaboration between organisations, learning from your colleagues and peers about what they've done, why they've done it. So Birmingham is an example But it's not sat on its own in that sense, like a Cambridge. And there is examples to be learned, there are lessons to be learned, there are change, there is innovation, there is vision. Now, what's this changing? One of the things that it's changing is that more storage was needed. Imaging creates a lot of space. If it was in this room, it would probably be full. But luckily, a lot of this is moving digital, so there isn't so much paper being around. But just moving that archive of imaging onto a storage capacity, one, it's cheaper through the cloud, generally speaking, depending on which cloud provider you use, of course. But also, it means access to the information does allow for innovation. It does mean that it is easier getting things on the cloud. There are things around security as well. You don't have to embed images onto people's laptops, which they leave on trains with various MI6 secrets on for people to pick up and hit the front page of the Daily Mail. So if you actually look at some of these things around cloud services, what devices you can use, and how best to use them. Mike Fisher, who's a CCIO at Liverpool Broad Green, talks very passionately about this. And one of the things that he found when he started talking to some of his clinical colleagues about what technology they might want to use, everyone raised their hand and said, yes, I'd like an iPad, please, Mike. I'd like an iPad as well, please. And just in case you missed it, I would also like an iPad. One of the things that Mike realized after he gave everybody iPads is there was nothing on those iPads. So no one could actually do anything. So it's one thing having a decision about iPads, another thing having a decision about bring your own device or choose your own device, which are other buzzwords which are going on in the market. But if there's nothing on it, and if you haven't actually designed what benefits you're going to use that technology for within your clinical processes, you're investing money and getting very little benefit. They seem very obvious points that I'm making, but it's astounding how many people say, here's technology, then don't do anything. So what does this mean? Well, so 40 terabytes. I remember when I used to get excited by 100 megabytes storage on my laptops. I'm probably showing more age. But 40 terabytes already growing from radiology. There's another 40 terabytes that are already in cardiology. So John mentioned about the proliferation outside of radiology with some of the digital imaging technology. This is just the start, or as the Americans would say, this is the get-go. What's going to this like? There is some stuff from NHS supply chain which talks about 100 petabytes just by moving some of their archived imaging over. Now, if you imagine that on a hospital scale, if you scale up from Birmingham to some of the larger organisations, imagine that opportunity around the kind of storage market and what that's going to change is going to look like. What suppliers need to do in order to work with organisations to make sure this looks right. What does the IT strategy and the IT plan look like in order to facilitate some of this? It's not just a PACS and RIS thing. It is a wider organisation environment. So, the Clinical Digital Maturity Index. Some of you may have heard of this. This is something EHI Intelligence designed over the last kind of 2.5 years. We joined in partnership with NHS England in November to launch this at EHI Live. One of the things that we did with the Clinical Digital Maturity Index is to try and profile an acute hospital in terms of some of the clinical systems they should be using in order to facilitate that environment of innovation and benefits and effective use of systems. Here's a little map. Now, I normally have a fancy touchscreen which I can zoom in on and stuff like that, but technology is bound to fail me, so I won't attempt it. But just to give you an idea, so core ancillary is where you can start to see some of the core things here around pharmacy, pathology, RIS and PACS, and what organisations are actually using. So not only do we talk about what systems they've got, we actually talk about who's providing them as well. It's pretty obvious the foundation level. If you haven't got a PAS system, discharge letters, community PAS and a simple BI, you're really going to struggle doing some of this stuff. Now, it's based on a traffic light system. So you can see the ones in red means you don't have a system, and therefore there's a mixed economy of amber, and the ones in green mean you've got it. So it's an idiot-proof scenario in terms of understanding on a snapshot what you've got. Now, you can see what this looks like. Now, as you're starting to talk about innovation, proliferation, EMR, EHR, EPR, whichever acronym you want to use, one of the things you need to understand is what that acute looks like at the moment, because they are all different. You can walk into one acute and they're missing some of these core systems here. That's a good place to start. We've seen people really struggle with maternity, but they don't have a maternity system. People struggling with bed management, but no bed management system. One of the core things around kind of patient safety issues, which has been raised recently, is prescribing of wrong drugs and over-prescribing of heavy, strong drugs, especially in the oncology area where cancer drugs are particularly very strong and they have to be very right for the individual. Technology can really help on this side. One, in terms of using content from multiple providers in terms of what the best practice is around diagnosing and prescribing, but also in terms of the access to that information, helping junior doctors with the access to the information. I'm not going to go and use that computer on a wheel in the corner by the nursing station if it takes me 20 minutes to log on. And then when I am logged on, I realise I don't have access to some of this stuff. So what are we back at? We're back at integration again. So integration is a massively important thing. What are we trying to do with some of this stuff? What are the benefits? How is that clinical workflow progressed through the organisation? Now, if I move on from this a little bit, one of the things that we found is that nearly everybody has a PACS system, nearly everybody has a RIS system, everybody has computers. So one of the things we started to look at with the CDMI dashboard within EHI Intelligence, which is a tool which enables people to benchmark organisation against organisation. By the way, it's free to anyone in the NHS, so if you haven't looked at this, log on. It doesn't cost you a penny. So you can see some of the age of systems here. So one of the things you talk about here, so pharmacy is a 12-and-a-half-year-old system, and that's an average. So that means you've got some organisations that were 25-year-old systems. Now, I would call those burning platforms. Please don't quote me on that one. But these are burning platforms. They are restricting people's use. They are restricting effective use. They cause a massive amount of frustration. If you ask people what they think of the IT department, what they often talk about is their frustration at logging onto systems, not actually how effective the IT department is, but it's very easy to blame the IT department and treat them a bit like a help desk scenario. The IT department is not a help desk. The IT department is there to facilitate business improvement, a new modernised health service. So I just thought that would give you a bit of mix to add to what I was just saying before. Now, I've talked about effective use. Some of you may have picked up some of the stuff that's going off in the US at the moment around the term of meaningful use. I'm English, so I prefer effective to meaningful, but that's my own problem. Key thing about effective use is use it. If you've bought a system, don't let it sit in the corridor. I hope there's no one from Oracle here, but Oracle spent an awful lot of time selling services to the public sector. They then made a lot more business by selling time to help people actually use those systems. It's a great business model, but it's actually pretty damn true, because what they actually are doing is actually making them understand the benefits of the money that they've invested already. Ideally, it'd be good if they could use it straight away without spending hundreds of pounds on consulting every second, but the key thing is using it. Getting it proliferated through the organisation. It's not a personal thing. If you're just using it, it's not effective. If the person next door is using it, it's still not effective. Make sure everyone is using it through that whole patient cycle, that whole clinical cycle, and the admin cycle as well. When people send off results for pathology, for radiology images, they're often waiting for them to fill out a form which says, okay, I need the NHS number, I need to know their exact address, I need to know whether they've been here before I can send the results back to that clinician who's trying to make a decision. Technology can change this. Technology is changing this, but it needs to be used, and it needs to be used effectively. Measure it. So you're using it. How well are you using it? Is it through 20% of the organisation? Are there 3 people out of 10 in your department using it? Is it being used effectively? It only comes out of measuring some of these things. How many of you ask the question of the systems and whether they're using them, what their feelings are about their systems? It's a very difficult question to ask. You can sit in this room and you can say, okay, do you like this presentation? It's maybe not a comfortable question for me to ask, because I'd get some criticism back, but unless I ask that question, how am I going to change? How am I going to improve for the future? I need to measure that. Now, the slide back at the beginning in terms of market drivers with the gentleman with his glasses and his flip chart is going to be coming in and measuring some of this. If you haven't got some of the answers, it'd be quite simple. Your measurement won't look as good as it potentially is. So really understanding the benefits and how it's driving through means you can measure it back and then report it in. Also, when you're trying to get further investment, unless you can actually prove that this stuff is actually generating benefits, then why would you get more investment? It seems, again, such an obvious question. Use it, measure it. Again, there's been a lot of talk about QIP. In some ways, you could put this as a market driver at the top alongside the Nicholson report. But the reason why I've put it down here is there's some fundamental words in here that kind of make sense. Quality, innovation, productivity, prevention. Quality is a number of different things that you can potentially use. Innovation, I've talked about. Productivity is doing things differently sometimes. I sometimes sit there in my computer and I think, am I really using my time effectively here? Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go away for 5 minutes. come back and see whether I can be a little bit more productive, do something different. Such an easy thing to get tunneled into what you're doing, that general day-by-day attrition of time against you. Organisation-wide perpetual transformation. People will talk about transformation. If you look at the definition of transformation, it's moving from one point to another point. If you look at the rest of the public sector and you look at the background around things like outsourcing and transformation, business process outsourcing, what you found is a lot of organisations who struggled with their IT quickly moved from, we're struggling, here's a 10-year outsourcing contract, they go through their 10 years, lots of nice shiny new kit, sweat the assets for a while to make your profit, and then you're stuck with the same scenario of where you are. Perpetual transformation is about continually asking those questions. Am I using it? Am I measuring it? Is it quality? Is it innovation? What's the productivity here? So perpetual transformation is always asking those questions and moving along. Patience. Don't forget them. Very important. So capital is king. So one of the reasons why capital is king is because a lot of people haven't got any revenue. And if you haven't got any revenue, the only thing you can talk about is capital. So again, a business case for the organisations on capital, business case for the suppliers and helping them work and get those innovation into the department by talking about capital spend rather than necessarily revenue spend. Cultural change needs to happen. Procurement and collaboration. It's collaboration with suppliers, with your peers, with other organisations. Procurement needs to change. We're wasting an awful lot of time and money on these things. New technology, it's there, it's coming, it's changing. 10-year-old software is 10-year-old software. The gulf in change in software over that period of time is immense. Don't forget the outcomes. What are the outcomes? Why am I doing this? What is the point? It's a core question. Thank you very much. Questions? Sorry, give me questions.
Thank you. We'll save questions for the Q&A session, but if I could now invite to stage Chris Townend. Chris is the Global Product Marketing Manager for Agfa HealthCare. Chris.
Thank you. So I'm glad to be here. I was invited. I'm actually based out of Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. So flew in especially for this event. Actually, not quite, but it is a whirlwind tour, though. So as mentioned, I'm one of the global product marketing managers, primarily with Impacts, the packs, but also with ISIS and also Agility, which is the latest packs. But ISIS is what we're going to talk about here. So what I want to do is give you an introduction to ISIS and also some of the challenges that are faced in the healthcare environment, and also an example of one site that was our first ISIS customer, and how they've progressed, and that is Cleveland Clinic in the US. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to those. So what is ISIS? ISIS is a Agfa solution. I like to call it a solution. It's not a product. It's a solution to a problem. And in this case, it's the problem is how to image enable the enterprise and regional healthcare systems. And from that, ISIS gives you the ability to, as we say here, create, collaborate, exchange, and manage the comprehensive medical imaging record throughout the continuum of care of the patient. So the patient is at the center of this, and all the way along their continuum of care throughout their care paths and treatment paths, whatever that may be. So some of the challenges that are being faced globally, the UK, US, Canada, you name it, it's very similar, is the healthcare market as far as the challenges. And the biggest thing is that, do more with less, but do it at a higher quality. Tends to be the continuous thread of discussion everywhere. And as we know, the US is going through major change with what they call Obamacare over there, but meaningful use and all that type of thing, which is having a profound effect on their healthcare system, and is actually making it come more in line with the rest of the world, to be honest, with the patient in the middle rather than the business entity in the middle. So how are the providers or the healthcare organizations responding? One of them is they're looking at consolidation. There's a lot of consolidation going on globally, hospitals merging with each other, trusts, as you are well aware, merging, wanting to do more with less, etc. deploying of software or other information needs to be able to have a single point of contact. And again, it's all about reducing cost but improving quality. Things like the EPR, EHR that are being deployed in regions, in trusts throughout the world to give greater access in a single point of care access to information regarding that particular patient. And again, centralization of clinical systems, again with platform consolidation, trying to reduce all those or eliminate all the silos of information that currently exist in hospitals. You know, each department has bought their own system over the years. They use their own system and it's totally siloed within their own department. It's not shared with anybody else. To try and do that sharing usually is a huge challenge to be able to get that information out. And typically what happens is you get delays in patient care, you get repeat exams having to be done. Radiology is obviously well known for that, that, you know, back in the film days, you lost the film, you did another x-ray, or whatever it may be. So this is just an example of some of the challenges from a patient perspective and a patient visit. So patients come into hospitals. They usually, I mean, not all the time, but typically they'll come for multiple tests, multiple exams, multiple departments, depending on what their treatment path is or what their care path is. So there's lots of information gathered at all of these different steps within the patient path throughout the healthcare organization. And we have different types of data, of course. We've got images, we've got textual or metadata, we've got treatment plans, follow-ups, etc. So what typically used to happen is, of course, all those textual things would go into the paper chart of the patient, and the images would not, of course, because images can't really go on paper very easily. So then what happened was the images remained in their own silos. In this case, radiology would have film libraries, cardiology, for example, but other departments, endoscopy, gastroenterology, all those types of places, would store their own images and data, and they would be the gatekeeper of them. With the essence of the EMR or EPR coming in, all the paper data or all the clinical notes, all the information about the patients that are acquired at different parts of the care continuum, can be now put into an electronic format and are now available anywhere throughout the EMR in the system. The images, though, were still not part of that. They were still out in their own space, in their own world, and again, you needed specialized tools, depending on the departments, to view these images and do anything with them. So, and of course, every time a patient has an encounter somewhere in the hospital, there's data provided, but there's also a lot of imaging done in all these different departments. And so the challenge is, how do you get that image data in to the electronic systems along with all the other data around that patient? And that's where ICES comes in from our side. So what we see in Agfa is we see what we call the Trillium, three foundational systems that need to work in harmony in order to provide this full electronic health record for the patient. The first one is the clinical information system, which I'm sure you're all aware of. Some examples of people like Epic, Orbis from an Agfa side, Orion, things of that nature, where a lot of information is already stored, either demographic information, physician orders, documents around the patient itself. Then we move down into enterprise content management or document management systems, which is another key thing now. And of course, there's a lot of documents produced within a hospital and around a patient, anywhere from consent forms right through to discharge orders, surgical notes, those types of things. And again, the clinical information system may be able to have access to them, may be able to view them, but you need some system that actually manages those in the sense of what are the access controls around those documents, how are they versioned, are you always looking at the latest version, who authored them, all those types of things are typically not in the clinical information system. Just the access to them is all that you typically get in there, but can't see any of the other information around them. And then the third part of the trillium is imagers. So as we know, imagers are produced all over the hospital and outside the hospital for that matter. So this is the missing step at the moment, or was, in the full comprehensive electronic health record. So this is where Agfa comes in with what we call ISIS, which is the Imaging Clinical Information System. And that then gives you the EHR now, the full EHR with data, documents, images, and all then the data around the clinical information system, all in one central place that can be centrally accessed. What we're also seeing now is a trend for the images and the document management systems to come together. This is something that's happening, it's beginning to happen now. There's a few companies out there that are looking at this. And of course, from our side, we are looking at this as well. We have a document management system, and we have obviously an imaging clinical information system. So again, marrying the two together so that it's much easier to manage and keep track of all that information. Here's just a short list of some of the areas where images are produced within the hospital. You don't need to read it. It's just really emphasizing the point that, you know, radiology and cardiology may be the big producers of images in a traditional manner, but they're by no means the only. And some of these departments actually, you could argue, produce bigger quantities of images, and also the data size is a lot bigger. If you look at pathology and places like that, it makes radiology and cardiology look quite small. So there's a lot of areas here in there. So one of the questions to always look at when deciding on what we want to do here is, how do you go about introducing an enterprise-wide system? Typically, what has happened in the past and what still happens today in a lot of places is it's one strategy at a time. In other words, Department X has some money, Department X wants to go out and do something, so they do, and they spend their money without looking at the big picture of what does that mean for the entire organization, or what does that mean for the health care and the patient itself. So you end up with a lot of systems that may or may not talk to each other, that may or may not be on the same level of standards, etc. And you end up with gaps between those systems, versus having a single strategy that can then be rolled out over time in an organized manner, and it all fits in together, and in this case, there's no gaps between each of these different things. And obviously, the one strategy, as far as we're concerned, is the way to go, is develop your strategy first, then implement it. And one of the key things is, you know, well, how do I implement that strategy? These are just a few examples of how you could do it. This is definitely not the only list and the end list. And of course, these can all be interchangeable. In other words, it's not one or the other. You could do all these, depending on the type of environment you are and how you want to work it out. The first one is probably something that does not happen. And in fact, I've never seen that happen yet, and I doubt it ever will, unless it's a brand new hospital being built, starting from scratch, etc. It's probably not going to happen. So then you move down to, well, you know, do it on a technology level, do I do it on a department level, or do I do it on a care path or discipline level, or interchanging between them. And these are just some of the ideas of, you know, points to think about when creating a strategy of how you want to deploy it and roll it out. And I want to give you an example. I mentioned Cleveland Clinic. Before, they were our first ISIS customer. And Cleveland Clinic is in case you don't know, they're a large organization in the US. They do about 2 million radiology exams a year to date. And they do have centers throughout the US. They actually have some abroad as well. They have a Cleveland Clinic in Dubai. They also have a Cleveland Clinic in Canada. So they are a worldwide organization. So they started out, they had radiology packs. They've had that for quite a while, and they had cardiology packs. These are two different vendors, so it's not a single entity here. So they started with wanting to, firstly, put radiology and cardiology into their EPR. And their EPR is Epic, just as an FYI. So radiology goes into their image management system, which is their PACS system. And from there, they have a VNA associated with the radiology department and the viewer, which is then embedded into their Epic word. This side here is Agfa in the world. So this is the start of ISIS. So as I say, they're rolling it out in this start. They started with radiology because they knew it. It was something that they've had a lot of experience with. So they started in radiology. Then they added cardiology. Cardiology, like I said, is its own system. It was a siloed system. So again, they have their own PACS. And then straight to the viewer, and again, viewing it within. But the storage was in the cardiology department, not centralized at this point in time. They then looked at going out beyond the traditional, and in their case, women's care was their next place that they saw a need for it. So women's health, again, all the imaging within women's health was then sent to the centralized viewer, and again, able to be deployed within their EPR. So then they decided, well, if we want to go bigger, we can't just keep adding silos, we can't just keep adding ad hoc different things, because it's just not going to work. It's just not going to be a manageable system in the long run. So they looked at non-image acquisition stations, standalones, and not integrated. So this is now moving outside of your traditional world of things like, for example, standalone devices, ultrasound carts that are owned by other departments, like the emergency department or wherever, women's care, throughout the hospital, but they're not owned by radiology, in this example, or imaging departments that have their own systems, and also then mobile imaging needs, as we mentioned, on the floors, on the wards. Photographs are taken of wounds, things of that nature. They need to be put somewhere. They're usually taken either on a tablet PC or, in this case, smartphones sometimes. And then something has to be done with them. Typically what would happen is whoever took them would take them back to their department, upload them into some computer that they have in their department, and that's where they'd sit. And no one else would ever know about them, and only the people within that department would ever see them again. So the first thing they did was extend the VNA across everywhere. So they started with the storage layer and the VNA and management of that, and put that across their entire organization. So all images, regardless now, will reside in that layer and then be accessed from that layer by whatever mechanism is in there. So all those images and image management systems, ISIS workflow services, that is a mixture of lots of different things. I'll go into that a little bit later as to what that actually means. But the idea now is they can take images from anywhere, they can send them into the VNA, and from there can be accessed in the viewer within their EMR, EPR, in context with all the relevant patient information, encounter information, everything else. So that was how Cleveland did it. And like I said, that was a mixture. They did some modalities, they did some departments, they did some care paths. And they're still rolling it out to date. They have what they call service lines. They have 22 hooked up to this model of ISIS. So, and they're still expanding. They've still got a lot more to go yet. So this conceptually gives you an idea of what ISIS actually will enable. So what you have here is, across the middle here is basically the ISIS solution. And you can enter that at different points along that path, depending on what it is that you're hooking into. So for example, if we look at the furthest end, which is the display and enterprise viewing of it here, you'll see that, for example, impacts comes in with only a couple of steps left to do in that process, because impacts, we know it, obviously, it's part of our system. We know that the information within that PAC system is all validated and verified. We know it is 100% accurate, and therefore we don't need to do a lot of these steps before it. If you go to the other extreme, we have ISIS for mobile and web. What that is what I mentioned is going on the wards, even home care, anything like that, where you want to take images, and in particular photographs of the patient's condition. It could be a diabetes patient that is at home and is having home treatment, and they want to take photographs of the, how their ulcers are coming along, etc. And so in this case, there's no information. They're not hooked into the RIS. They're not hooked into any of those hospital information systems at the time of taking those images. So this will give them the ability here to come all the way through the stack to creating the image, to then identifying it with the correct patient, metadata, all those types of information that you need in order to have it logged properly, verifying it so that it is actually who it says it is, just like in the PACS world, storing it into the VNA, integrating it to any systems that it requires to be in, whether it's an EMR, whether it's a portal, whether it's a patient portal, whether it's a HIE, which is a US term, Health Information Exchange, but that's between multiple trusts or multiple hospitals that have access to it. And of course, the displaying of it in context with the rest of the information that that patient folder would have in it. And also, we have a lot of APIs in this layer that allow for integration into other systems. A lot of hospitals will create their own, I'll call them apps, for want of a better term, that they want to use within their hospital. And so again, we have the mechanisms to very easily hook those in using 3 or 4 different types of API that we have available in this stack to be able to give them that full range of information. So what we have is, as I've described, we have lots of information coming from lots of different departments and lots of images being created throughout the care path of the patient. And in lots of cases today, they are all just like this. They're all segmented, depending on where you are and what department you're in, where you're accessing the information. You may see some of these. It's doubtful you'll probably see them all. Just because, you either do not know about them, because it's in a siloed department that you know nothing about, or you just don't have access to them because of security rights or whatever it may be. Even though you know about it, you have to get permission to actually access it and get it. So ISIS, what that does is it basically brings all these images together to give you an overview of the patient. And now you can see already we're beginning to see a bit more about what this patient is, who she is in this case, and what there is. And the idea here is now that with ISIS, with the trillium of the 3, the clinical information system, the document management system, and the image management system, you then get a clear picture of the patient. And now this patient is no longer just a number, it's no longer just something on a screen, it actually is meaningful as a human being. And that is really, and this, by the way, is Janet. Janet is an Agfa patient, not really a patient, but we named her Janet. So you'll see her on the banner outside. You'll see the, yeah, so if you ever hear us referring to Janet, here she is. This is Janet. So, so that's the goal of ISIS. And just to summarize, again, we put it into 4 main categories of create, collaborate, exchange, and manage. And this takes you through the entire continuum of the image life cycle as to how you create it. Collaboration is key, obviously, in today's healthcare environment, whether it's just within the hospital, between departments, or between hospitals, from a specialized hospital to a general hospital, or a community hospital, or whatever it may be. And then even broader than that, to be going, you know, countrywide, and then beyond that even. So healthcare is becoming just a global phenomenon now, in the sense that with collaboration, there's nothing to stop someone today having a second consult or something with a physician in another part of the world, if they happen to be a specialist in that particular area, and be able to exchange all that information accordingly and securely, of course. And also patient access is another key thing that is on the forefront now of patients wanting to manage their own health records, wanting to have access to them, wanting to see the reports, etc. And of course, there's also, you know, why can't patients input their own images? So for example, if they're at home and they're doing their own treatment of a diabetes ulcer, for example, it would be nice for them to be able to take a photograph of it, send it back to the hospital to be able to then have someone look at it and say, yes, you know, treatment's going well, carry on, or vice versa, say, nope, you better come back in, we need to look at it, it's not progressing as well as we could, without having that expense of them having to come in just to see whether it was being managed okay or not. So again, using the efficiencies of how you can manage the system in the healthcare system as a whole without incurring extra costs, but improving the quality of care. And with that, I would like to conclude, and thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks very much, Carl and Chris. We said we'd save questions to this portion of the morning. You've had a lot of presentation to you. I hope you've kind of got a couple of questions or thoughts on that. Who'd like to kick things off out there in the audience? If not, I'll use the kind of... Oh, sorry. And there's a microphone. Could I just ask everyone to identify themselves first of all and then speak clearly into the microphone?
It's Andrew Jackson from Agfa, Northeast Account Manager. You mentioned the G-Cloud framework. Do you see that as something that is being underutilised at the moment?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you can go onto the .gov.uk website. You can see what money's going through it, where it's being spent. 64% of organisations on G-Cloud are SMEs, so there's an awful lot of choice. Often people talk in the health market about lack of choice. There's a lot of choice on there, and a lot of organisations to work with. There is a procurement platform which is there. There are a lot of risk assessments that have already been made, pre-approval, pricing, examples, good procurement practices, helps with some of the tendering and PQQ processes. So I really do think the frameworks generally are underused, but G-Cloud in particular. There are an awful lot of data centres and servers in the health market which are in-house, are a little old, are going to cause some issues as the market moves forward. I mentioned storage is going to be a massive thing moving forward, and I think G-Cloud is potentially one of the answers that people really ought to be looking at. You say it's underutilised, but what's the NHS's barrier to not driving there? I think because of the culture of the health market, it's particularly risk averse, like a lot of the public sector, but the health particularly so. One, in terms of the security around records, data, and you know, people often feel that if all the information is sat in their building, they deal with those issues. As I mentioned, if you put that information on a laptop, it's not particularly secure if you leave it somewhere. But you know, these are similar organisations. You know, the Ministry of Justice and people like that are on the cloud service. They have as many, if not more, risk issues when it comes to data management as the health service. So there is risk, and that risk shouldn't be underestimated. And not everybody wants to work with an organisation that isn't guaranteeing that that data is held within the UK and it's got the right business continuity around it, but there are organisations that provide that. And also I think around the original G-Cloud, we're on version 4 now. With the original G-Cloud, some of the pricing methodologies around it hadn't been ironed out to the level that they could have been. It wasn't as cheap. One of the things with the way that IT budgets work for organisations buying is they really need to know how much they're going to spend. One of the things about G-Cloud model is it's supposed to charge you as you use it, so the two don't compute in a way. But that also has changed and moved along. You've seen AWS, so it's Amazon, for anyone who doesn't know the acronyms, and cloud are in a price war at the moment. Now, that's a good thing for people. When people start slashing prices, providing more services, there are benefits to be had there.
Thank you. Other questions? I might use actually the chair's prerogative. Sorry, gentleman at the back. You're just passing the mic on. That's fine. In terms of, Chris, you were giving sort of Cleveland Clinic as an example. And Cleveland is often given as a reference site by many people as one of the shining examples in the US. Could you give any sort of any flavour of the types of benefits they've been able to achieve by bringing all of their kind of visual healthcare and imaging together and integrating it into their EMR?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the first benefits that they saw, they're still working on actual getting quantifiable information out of the systems as to the true benefits from a quantifiable point of view, but one of the intangibles, shall I say, that they found straight away was because they had a very dispersed medical organization. They do have sites throughout the US and especially in the Ohio area, that patient treatment plans and patient treatment in general, the times would reduce dramatically because they had access to all the information now, whether it was done at the rural hospital and then the patient was going into the Cleveland Clinic main campus. All that information was available, and then you saw the care paths being reduced dramatically from a patient point of view.
And this is an ongoing process. You were saying that they've done 20 kind of treatment
Correct.
areas.
They call them service lines, which are not necessarily departments. So it's a US terminology, but out of those, they have done about, I would say, about a dozen departments at the moment. I mentioned their women's care or women's health. They've done dermatology, ophthalmology, wound care, diabetes care, and a few others to mention.
And sort of moving from outside the US, which some people see as a strange place, a long way away.
Yeah, I agree.
But I mean, in Europe, I think there's reference sites for impacts,
yes.
particularly in the Netherlands.
Yes. So in the Netherlands, there's a Radboud, is a university hospital in Nijmegen, in the north of Holland, which is in the process of rolling out ISIS as well. And they have a very aggressive timetable. They're looking at actually having 30 departments hooked up by the end of next year. So, which is a very aggressive timeline. I hope they can do it. And that includes actually upgrading their radiology packs, their cardiology packs. It's not just adding the other departments. So it's a massive undertaking. They do have a large team, but I think one of the key things with something like this is you need to have that end goal in sight. You need to know exactly what that end point is and then work towards it rather than trying to work department at a time and hope you get to the end goal. And even Cleveland found that in their days where they were repeating because they didn't do that initially. And so they go to one department, do something, and the next department, oh, we should have done it differently. And then, more cost, etc.
Okay. Please, Grant.
Obviously you know me, Chris, but I'm Grant Witheridge. For the guys who don't know me, I'm the UK MD for Agfa. It's fascinating to listen to the experience of Cleveland. Obviously, a site I know a little bit about, less so a little bit about Nijmegen. In the the idea of this to share practical experiences with, Agfa colleagues, partners, customers. Are there certain things you can point to? Perhaps I know Cleveland, who are a little bit mature, sharing experiences with the audience on what particularly they did well to help, to get to such a state of maturity, and equally, on reflection, things that looking back, that they would have changed to help them get to where they are. Is there certain things, I don't know, within the organisation, within their budgets, did they change, how they changed the organisation to implement this?
Yeah, I mean, both Cleveland and Radboud, for that matter, one of the first things they did is they actually set up, I'll call it an enterprise imaging team, or a regional team, whatever you want to use, from a terminology point of view, that was made up of physicians, clinicians, IT, etc., on a more hospital or regional basis rather than a departmental basis, so not just a radiology-focused thing. They took a lot of their experience from the radiology department or cardiology department as far as, we need an order. There needs to be something to track the patient. I mean, it's great to put images into the system, but how do I get them back out again? How do I find them? How do I find them in context with what I'm trying to look for? So there has to be a lot of that thought put into that, and a lot of that upfront work was what was done. Some of the challenges that were found in Cleveland, for example, was that when they went to actually implement, they found a lot of technology challenges, to be perfectly honest, in that one system wouldn't talk to the other one in the way they thought it was going to, or one was an older system, was not up to the latest level of standards like HL7 or DICOM or whatever it may be. And so there was a lot of those type of things that were, they thought they knew everything until they went to actually do it, and then, oops, we need to now either change our way or upgrade or get the vendor in to help us with whatever it was that they were trying to achieve. And then on the other side then is, the storage level there. Again, how much storage do I need and how do I expand it out from these different departments? Because, you're not only talking still images, but you have video in there as well. You have a lot of different formats, and also one of the other big things was security and access privileges. Because once you start going outside, there's a lot of information that some places do not necessarily want to share, especially when you get into departments such as psychiatric medicine and things like that, where they potentially can record a session with a patient with video. But of course, you don't want that being seen by just anybody, but you want to have access to it in the patient's folder for psychiatry or whoever. So they were just some of the things that they had to do, and Radboud's doing a very similar manner. They have a huge team looking into all this.
And from the clinician's perspective, is it largely automated?
Yes.
So from their perspective, when they're looking at
yes,
the
idea,
EMR or whatever they're using?
Yeah, the idea is the input for a startup has to be as simple as possible. You don't want them going through pages and pages of risks and whatever just to create an order and then get the information in. So the idea is that you take your image and you basically upload it, and in the background it will create that order if there isn't one. So if it's a non-radiology, cardiology type system, it will create that order for you and it will automatically send it through into the system. Similarly, to get it back out in context, I'm typically working in the EPR or the EHR. I'm really working at a patient level, at a patient information. So when I log into the system, look for that particular patient, I immediately see everything that is available, and then I can access it in context with whatever I'm looking at, including comparison. Because that's the other thing. It's fine to be able to say, I've stored all this information, I want to look at this image, but I want to look at this image with a previous image, which sometimes people forget that, it's a care path or it's an episode of care, not just a single image or a single data point.
I guess it's not purely images then.
It's not.
The whole thing.
It has to be wrapped in with the entire medical record of the patient. So the image is just one part of it. Obviously, it's a very key part. As they always say, an image is worth 1,000 words. But in this case, it probably is true.
Slightly more storage, perhaps.
Slightly more storage, yes.
Thanks.
I was going to actually ask a question of Dave Burns. Perhaps it's unfair because he's not actually up here. Dave, for anyone who doesn't know him, is senior buyer from NHS supply chain and has done a lot of work on the framework contract for PACS that's been heavily used by NHS Trust over the past 2 years. Dave, I was just going to perhaps put the question to you in terms of the kind of types of NHS needs and sort of requirements around image sharing, about integrating images into kind of clinical information systems. What sort of direction of travel are you seeing on that? Sorry, and if we could get a mic to Dave as well.
So I'm now turning around and seeing colleagues in the room as well. So yeah, we're seeing a number of trusts looking right now for image exchange above the traditional image exchange portal, which I think has served very well to date. At the moment, though, what the main drive that we're seeing around local procurement is the burning platform, that is, get me a new PACS, get me a new RIS, I have to be compliant. And without stealing some of my own thunder a little later, we do challenge trusts to think a little bit further beyond the bounds of where they are at the moment, because things change. And I have a slide a little later which shows you how drastically things can and do change, even though you think you know your market, your area very, very well indeed. Things can come from left field, as they say, and hijack you. But at the moment, I think the challenge that organisations have, again, everything we've heard so far around departmental kind of spending, isolation within departments, organisations that we're seeing at the moment in the main are very much focused on fixing their immediate problem.
Right.
And I think the next challenge for the PACS companies out there will be to continue that innovation and to show how sharing can be achieved in a more holistic way.
And for NHS colleagues in the kind of room, are there kind of, does this ring true? This kind of the burning platform as the immediate priority? Would perhaps anyone would like to come back on that? Yeah, please, choose James.
I think it is because, sorry, James Love for Barnet. I think because of time constraints, I suppose that's the main thing, especially in London where we are. But
and that time constraint, 30th of June this year?
Yes.
That's a pretty
it's we haven't got long next year.
Next year, sorry.
Yeah. So I think that's the main thing is the time constraints with everyone and being out.
Okay. And perhaps anyone else on that same point? Is time constraint the big one at the moment?
I would say it is, and listening to what you're saying, it sounds wonderful, everything you're talking about. And I suppose maybe we are restricting ourselves if we are thinking about the immediate thing that we have to do, which is PACS and RIS, but not looking beyond that and seeing, where we could go further, I suppose.
Presumably the decisions which are about to get taken, or in the process of being taken, are ones you're going to have to live with for quite some time to come.
Yes, yeah, so...
Right.
Yeah.
Better be good decisions, then. So just to keep us on track for the schedule for the day, what I'd like to suggest is that we take the refreshment break, the coffee break now as scheduled. Please do take time to go and look at some of the demos, speak to some of the people here who are representing Agfa and other sort of companies with their partners. But I'm hoping for a lot more interactivity, and I hope this morning's really just begun to set the scene for a lot more discussion. Is everyone kind of happy now to sort of take the coffee break? That's great. So we'll be back in 15 minutes.